He stood there in front of 200 people, his voice dripping with condescension, explaining to his wife why she would never understand the complexities of running a real business. He had been building to this moment all evening, each glass of champagne making him bolder, each laugh from his colleagues inflating his ego just a little bit more. But what Marcus Chen didn't know, what he was about to discover in the most humiliating way possible, was that his wife didn't just understand business. She owned the very ground he was standing on, every inch of it. And in about 90 seconds, his entire world was going to collapse. Before we get to the moment when everything fell apart for Marcus, tell us where you're watching from: New York, Chicago, London, Toronto. Drop your city in the comments because this story has gone viral across 6 continents, and we want to know where our viewers are tuning in from. Now let me take you back to December 15th, to the annual Christmas party at Chen Technologies in downtown Seattle. Naomi Williams had been married to Marcus Chen for 7 years. 7 years of building a life together, or at least that's what she had thought they were doing. They had met at a tech conference in San Francisco, where Marcus was presenting on emerging software solutions, and Naomi was attending as an investor, though Marcus never bothered to ask what she did for work. He had been charming that night, attentive, different from the man he would eventually become. The conference had been one of those massive industry events where thousands of professionals gathered to network, learn, and pitch their ideas. Marcus had been on a panel about agile project management, and Naomi had been sitting in the audience, taking notes not because she needed to learn the material, but because she was evaluating potential investment opportunities. After the panel, they had ended up at the same networking reception. Marcus had approached her with confidence, introducing himself and immediately launching into a passionate explanation of his work. Naomi had been intrigued by his energy, his apparent dedication to his craft. They talked for over an hour that first night, and Marcus had asked for her number before the evening ended. He called her the next day, then the day after that, and within weeks they were dating seriously. The first year of marriage had been good. Marcus was a mid-level project manager at Chen Technologies, a company he claimed was named after his family, but actually had no relation to him whatsoever. He had joined the firm 5 years before meeting Naomi, working his way up through determination and, as Naomi would later realize, an impressive ability to take credit for other people's work. But in those early days, she hadn't noticed the warning signs. She had been too caught up in the romance of it all, too willing to overlook the small moments when Marcus would interrupt her or dismiss her opinions. She told herself he was just passionate about his work, just confident in his expertise. Naomi had her own career, though she rarely talked about it at home. She had learned early in their marriage that Marcus preferred to be the center of attention, the breadwinner, the successful one. Whenever she mentioned her work, he would change the subject or make dismissive comments about how her little projects were cute, but not quite on the level of what he dealt with every day. The first time it happened, she had been excited to tell him about a particularly complex acquisition her firm had just completed. She had spent months negotiating the deal, working 80-hour days, coordinating with lawyers and accountants and board members. When it finally closed, she had come home eager to share her victory. Marcus had listened for maybe 30 seconds before cutting her off to talk about a presentation he had given that day. He hadn't asked about the details of her deal. He hadn't congratulated her. He had simply pivoted the conversation back to himself. Naomi had felt the sting of that dismissal, but had convinced herself it was just bad timing, that he was stressed, that it didn't mean anything. But it kept happening. Over and over, her professional accomplishments were minimized or ignored entirely, so she stopped mentioning them. She kept her professional life and her personal life in separate boxes, never letting them touch. What Marcus didn't know was that Naomi Williams was the sole owner and CEO of Stratford Capital, one of the largest private investment firms in the Pacific Northwest. She had built the company from nothing over 15 years, starting with a small inheritance from her grandmother and turning it into a portfolio worth over $800 million. Her grandmother, a woman who had worked as a domestic worker for most of her life, had somehow managed to save $50,000 over the course of 50 years. When she passed away, she left it all to Naomi with a simple note that said, "Make something of yourself. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't." Naomi had taken that $50,000 and invested it carefully, learning everything she could about finance and business strategy. She had made smart bets on emerging technologies, had developed a reputation for being able to spot struggling companies that had hidden potential. She specialized in acquiring struggling tech companies, restructuring them, and turning them into profitable enterprises. Her success rate was phenomenal. Out of 43 acquisitions over the years, 38 had become profitable within 3 years. The other 5 had at least broken even, protecting her investors' money even when the ventures didn't succeed. The business community knew who she was. Her name appeared regularly in financial publications. She had been featured in Forbes, Fortune, and the Wall Street Journal. She sat on the boards of several major corporations. She was regularly invited to speak at conferences and universities, but at home with Marcus, she was just a wife, just someone who didn't really understand the complexities of the business world, just someone whose career was cute, but not serious. And 3 months ago, she had quietly purchased Chen Technologies. The acquisition had been straightforward from a business perspective. Chen Technologies was a solid company with good products and talented employees, but it had been mismanaged for years. The previous owner had made a series of bad strategic decisions, taken on too much debt, and failed to invest in necessary infrastructure upgrades. By the time the board started looking for a buyer, the company was months away from bankruptcy. Stratford Capital had swooped in with an offer that was fair to the shareholders, protected employee jobs and pensions, and gave Naomi control of a company that she knew she could turn around. She hadn't told Marcus. She had meant to, of course. She had planned to sit him down and explain that his company was drowning in debt, that the board had been desperately seeking a buyer, that her firm had made an offer that saved everyone's jobs and pensions. She had planned to tell him that she was now technically his boss, but the right moment never came. And then Marcus's behavior started to change in ways that made Naomi want to wait just a little longer. After he got the promotion to senior project manager, something shifted in Marcus. He became even more dismissive of Naomi, even more convinced of his own importance. He started working later hours, not because the job required it, but because he enjoyed being at the office where people deferred to him. He started making comments about how Naomi should be grateful that he was successful enough to support them both, even though Naomi's income was actually 20 times higher than his. He started criticizing small things about her clothes, her hair, her choice of friends. The man she had married was disappearing, replaced by someone she barely recognized. The Christmas party was Marcus's idea. He had been promoted to senior project manager 2 months earlier, a promotion that Naomi had actually approved through her management team, though Marcus didn't know that, and he was feeling invincible. The promotion had come with a substantial raise and a corner office, and Marcus had been insufferable about it. He insisted that Naomi attend as his wife, his plus one, his accessory for the evening. He had actually used that word, accessory, like she was a piece of jewelry meant to make him look good. She had hesitated. Showing up at Chen Technologies as Marcus's wife felt dangerous, like worlds colliding that were meant to stay apart. But he had pressed, and she had eventually agreed, curious to see how he behaved when he thought she was just another spouse in the crowd. She should have trusted her instincts. The party was held in the company's main event space, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and floor, the ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. The space had been beautifully decorated with white lights and evergreen garlands. A 20-foot Christmas tree dominated one corner, and several bars had been set up throughout the room. 200 employees and their partners filled the room, dressed in cocktail attire, drinking expensive wine that Naomi's investment had actually paid for, though no one except the executive team knew that yet. The bartenders were pouring premium brands, The catering company had been instructed to spare no expense, and a live jazz band was playing holiday standards. It was the kind of party that signaled a company with money to spend, which was ironic considering that 3 months earlier, Chen Technologies hadn't had enough cash flow to make payroll. Marcus was in his element. He worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, slapping backs, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. He introduced Naomi to his colleagues with phrases like, "This is my wife, and she doesn't really work in tech, and she keeps me grounded." Each introduction grated on Naomi a little more. She wasn't a tech outsider. She had invested in dozens of tech companies. She understood software development, market positioning, and corporate strategy better than most of the people in this room. But Marcus presented her as someone who existed only in relation to him, whose sole purpose was to support his career. Naomi followed a few steps behind, smiling politely, shaking hands when introduced, playing the role of the supportive wife. She was good at reading rooms, at assessing dynamics, and she could see the hierarchy playing out around her. The executives stood in small clusters, speaking in low voices. The mid-level managers like Marcus circulated aggressively, trying to make impressions. The junior employees gathered near the food, looking uncomfortable in their formal attire. Several executives recognized her, but honored the unspoken agreement to keep her identity quiet. Jennifer Park, the CFO, had given her a knowing nod when they made eye contact across the room. David Ochoa, the coup, had shaken her hand and said good evening, Ms. Williams, in a tone that made Marcus look at him strangely, wondering why a C-suite executive was being so formal with his wife. This was Marcus's night, after all. Or so he thought. As the evening wore on and the drinks flowed more freely, Marcus's behavior became increasingly problematic. He started making jokes at Naomi's expense. Little comments about how she didn't understand the tech world, how she spent her days doing who knows what. While he was out there changing the industry, his colleagues laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Some of them knew who Naomi was. Others were just uncomfortable with the casual disrespect Marcus was showing toward his wife. Naomi kept smiling, but something cold was settling in her chest. This was worse than she had anticipated. She had known Marcus was dismissive at home, but she hadn't realized how comfortable he was disrespecting her in public. At one point, Marcus told a story about how Naomi had once tried to give him advice about negotiating his salary. He told it like it was the funniest thing in the world, this idea that his wife might have insights into compensation strategy. The people around him laughed because he was their boss now, and that's what you do when your boss tells a story, even when it's not funny, even when it's mean. Naomi stood there, holding her wine glass, calculating. She was deciding how much more of this she was willing to tolerate before she shut it down. Then came the toast. Marcus climbed onto the small stage where a local jazz band had been playing earlier. The musicians had taken a break, leaving the stage empty. Someone handed him a microphone, probably thinking he was about to make an official company announcement. The room fell silent, everyone turning to see what the newly promoted senior project manager wanted to say. Marcus stood there under the spotlight, his face flushed from champagne and attention, looking like a man who believed he owned the world. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight." Marcus began, his words slightly slurred. "This has been an incredible year for Chen Technologies, and an even more incredible year for me personally. I've worked my tail off to get to this position, and I want to thank everyone who helped me get here." Scattered applause. Naomi felt her stomach tightening. She knew that tone in his voice. She had heard it before, usually right before he said something thoughtless or cruel. He was about to say something stupid. "I also want to take a moment to talk about the importance of support systems." Marcus continued, warming to his theme. "Behind every successful man is a woman, right? That's what they say, and I've got a great woman. My wife Naomi is here tonight, and I want to give her a round of applause for putting up with all my late nights and weekend work." More applause. Naomi wanted to disappear. She wanted to walk out of this party, out of this marriage, out of this entire situation, but she stood there, frozen, watching her husband perform. But you know what's funny? Marcus was warming up now, feeding off the attention, misreading the discomfort in the room as engagement. Naomi, sweetheart, stand up for a second. She stood slowly, every instinct screaming at her to walk out. But she stood, because that's what she had trained herself to do over 7 years of marriage. Stand when he wanted her to stand, smile when he wanted her to smile, be the supportive wife even when he was being insufferable. Naomi thinks she understands business. She thinks because she reads some articles and watches some documentaries that she gets what we do here. And I love her for trying, I really do. But there's a difference between reading about success and actually achieving it. You know what I mean. Some people laughed. Others looked uncomfortable. The executive team in the corner had gone very still, their faces unreadable. Jennifer Park looked like she was about to interrupt, but David Ochoa put a hand on her arm, shaking his head slightly. Let it play out, his gesture said. Let him dig his own grave. Like just tonight, we were talking about the new ownership structure. He caught himself, realizing he probably shouldn't be discussing that, but plowed ahead anyway, too drunk to care, and she was trying to give me advice about how to position myself with the new investors. And I'm thinking, baby, I love you, but maybe stick to whatever it is you do during the day and let me handle the corporate strategy, okay? The laughter was scattered now, nervous. Several people had pulled out their phones, some texting, some perhaps recording. This was clearly spiraling into uncomfortable territory. This wasn't the jovial toast of a successful executive. This was something else, something mean, spirited and wrong. Naomi remained standing, her face calm, her posture perfect. Inside, she was making calculations. She was deciding, in real time, whether to let this continue or to end it right now. Part of her wanted to walk out, to let Marcus have his moment of cruelty, to deal with it privately later. But another part of her, the part that had built an $800 million company from $50,000, the part that had negotiated with Fortune 500 CEO and won, that part was done being quiet. Marcus made the decision for her by continuing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Marcus continued, his voice getting louder, playing to the crowd now like he was performing at a comedy club. I think it's adorable when she pretends to understand finance and corporate structure. She'll throw around terms like equity stakes and acquisition strategies like she knows what they mean, and I just nod and smile because that's what you do, right? You support your spouse's little hobbies and interests even when they're way out of their depth. Someone in the back of the room gasped. One of the executives, a woman named Jennifer Park, who served as CFO and who had worked directly with Naomi on the acquisition, had stood up and was making her way toward the stage. But Naomi caught her eye and gave a small shake of her head. Not yet, let him finish. Let everyone see exactly who he is. The truth is. Marcus said, and now his tone was turning mean, the alcohol stripping away whatever filter he usually maintained. Some people are built for the boardroom, and some people are built for, well, other things, and that's okay. We can't all be titans of industry. Some of us have to be the support staff, you know, the behind-the-scenes people, the plus ones at the Christmas party. The room had gone completely silent now. The discomfort was palpable, thick enough to cut. Several people were openly staring at Marcus with horror, while others were looking at Naomi with pity, assuming she was just another woman being publicly humiliated by an arrogant husband. She stood there, still calm, still composed, watching her husband publicly humiliate her in front of 200 people. She was memorizing this moment, every detail of it, because she knew it would be the moment that ended her marriage. So here's my advice to everyone here, especially the younger guys. Marcus raised his glass like he was delivering wisdom from on high. Marry someone supportive. Marry someone who understands that you're the one with the real career. Marry someone who won't try to compete with you or pretend they're on your level professionally. Trust me, it makes everything so much easier. He took a long drink from his glass, clearly proud of his impromptu speech, oblivious to the horror and discomfort radiating from the crowd. A few people gave weak, obligatory applause, the kind you give when you don't know what else to do. Most just stood there in stunned silence, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. That's when Naomi made her move. She walked toward the stage with the same grace and confidence she used when entering boardrooms to negotiate nine-figure deals. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, each step deliberate, measured, powerful. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't hesitating. She was simply walking forward like a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet, which, as it happened, she did. She reached the stage and extended her hand for the microphone. Marcus, thinking she was going to play along with his narrative somehow, maybe make a cute self-deprecating joke to show what a good sport she was, handed it to her with a condescending smile. "Thank you, darling," she said, her voice clear and professional, the voice she used in board meetings and acquisition negotiations. That was quite the speech. Marcus beamed, misreading her tone completely, thinking she was complimenting him. Naomi turned to face the crowd. She spotted Jennifer Park, who now had her phone out, recording everything. She spotted David Ochoa, the coup, who was leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed and the faintest hint of a smile on his face, like he had been waiting for this moment. She spotted the other executives who knew exactly what was about to happen, who were probably taking bets on how long it would take Marcus to realize his mistake. And then she spotted all the regular employees, the project managers and developers and analysts who had no idea that their world was about to tilt on its axis, who thought they were just watching an awkward marital moment at a company party. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Naomi began, her voice carrying across the silent room. "This is my first time attending a Chen Technologies event, and I have to say, it's been incredibly educational. I've learned a lot about the company culture here, about the values, about the level of respect people show to their colleagues and to their families." Marcus was starting to look confused. This wasn't going the direction he expected. There was something in Naomi's tone, something sharp and controlled, that was penetrating his champagne-fueled confidence. "My husband just gave you all some advice about marriage," Naomi continued, pacing slowly across the stage like a professor delivering a lecture. "Let me give you some advice about business. First, never assume you know more than the person you're talking to. Second, never publicly disrespect anyone, especially not someone who might be in a position to impact your career. And third, always know who actually signs your paycheck." A ripple went through the crowd. People were starting to sense that something was happening, though most of them didn't know what yet. Jennifer Park was grinning now, not even trying to hide it. David Ochoa had straightened up, paying full attention, his arms still crossed, but his expression, one of barely contained amusement. "Marcus, honey, you're absolutely right that I understand corporate structure and acquisition strategies. You know why? Because I've executed over 40 acquisitions in the past decade. I've restructured more than 50 companies. I've turned failing businesses into profitable enterprises more times than I can count. That's what I do during the day, by the way, since you've never actually bothered to ask." Marcus's smile was fading now, confusion giving way to the first hints of concern. His champagne-fueled confidence was evaporating, replaced by something else. Uncertainty, the beginning of fear. "You mentioned the new ownership structure," Naomi said, her voice growing stronger, filling the room. "You suggested I didn't understand it. So let me clarify for everyone here, since it's going to be announced officially on January 2nd anyway. 3 months ago, Chen Technologies was acquired by Stratford Capital. The acquisition saved this company from bankruptcy. It saved all of your jobs. It saved your pensions and your health benefits and your stock options. Without this acquisition, most of you would have been unemployed by February." People were pulling out their phones now, frantically Googling Stratford Capital. Someone in the crowd whispered Stratford Capital to their partner, the name starting to ring bells for people who followed business news. The ripple of recognition was spreading through the room like a wave. Stratford Capital is a private investment firm based here in Seattle. And Naomi continued, her voice steady and commanding. "It was founded 15 years ago by a woman who started with nothing and built it into one of the most successful firms in the Pacific Northwest. That woman is me. I am the founder, owner, and CEO of Stratford Capital. I have been for 15 years. The room exploded. Not with noise, but with energy. 200 people all having the same realization at the same moment. 200 faces registering shock. 200 people all looking at Marcus, whose face had gone from confused to pale to something resembling horror, whose champagne glass was slipping from his fingers, who looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Which means, Naomi said, and now her voice had an edge to it, sharp as broken glass, cutting through the stunned silence, that I own this company, all of it, the building we're standing in right now, the equipment you use every day, the servers that run your systems, the intellectual property you develop, contracts you work on, every single asset of Chen Technologies. I own it, not as an investor, not as a board member, as the sole owner. Marcus tried to speak, but nothing came out. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. And that means, Naomi continued, each word deliberate and precise, that I am your boss, Marcus. I'm everyone's boss in this room. Jennifer, David, and the rest of the executive team report directly to me. They report to your wife, the wife you just spent the last 10 minutes publicly mocking and dismissing in front of the entire company, the wife whose little hobbies include owning the company where you work. The silence was absolute now. If someone had dropped a pin, the sound would have echoed through the warehouse space. No one moved, no one coughed, no one even seemed to breathe. All eyes were on Marcus, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole, whose face had gone from red with alcohol and ego to white with shock and growing horror. Naomi handed the microphone to Jennifer Park, who had climbed onto the stage, no longer able to contain her grin. Jennifer, would you like to officially introduce me to the staff? Jennifer took the microphone with barely suppressed glee, with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting months for this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to formally introduce Naomi Williams, CEO of Stratford Capital, and the new owner of Chen Technologies. Ms. Williams completed the acquisition in September and has been working closely with the executive team to ensure a smooth transition. She's invested significantly in our infrastructure, approved raises for our underpaid staff, and secured the contracts that are going to keep us growing for the next 5 years. She's the reason the company is still solvent. She's the reason we all got year-end bonuses this year for the first time in 3 years. Basically, she's the reason we're all still employed and the reason this company has a future. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then building into something genuine. People weren't sure what else to do. This was too surreal, too unexpected, too much like a movie to be real life. But it was real, and Naomi Williams was standing on stage, and Marcus Chen was standing beside her, looking like his soul had left his body. Naomi took the microphone back, her expression softening slightly. Thank you, Jennifer. Now, I want to be clear about something. I didn't reveal my identity tonight because my husband humiliated me, although that certainly was the catalyst. Marcus moved up the timeline, but I was planning to reveal it at the New Year's staff meeting anyway. This wasn't supposed to be some dramatic moment. It was supposed to be a professional announcement. She finally looked directly at her husband, who was still standing on the stage, frozen in place like a statue of shame and regret. What I will say is this: the way someone treats others when they think those people have no power is incredibly revealing. It shows character, or lack thereof, and Marcus, what you've revealed tonight is that you view me as less than you, as beneath you, as someone whose only value is in supporting your ego and staying out of your way. As someone who doesn't deserve respect because I'm not, in your eyes, contributing anything meaningful to the world. Naomi, I didn't mean. Marcus finally found his voice, but it came out as a whisper, weak and pathetic. Yes, you did, she said firmly, cutting him off. You meant every word. This wasn't some joke that went wrong. This wasn't the alcohol talking. This was how you actually think. This is how you've been thinking for years, I'm guessing. I was just too accommodating to call you on it. too willing to make myself smaller so you could feel bigger." She turned back to the crowd, her voice strengthening again. "I want everyone here to know that Chen Technologies is going to be a place where people are valued for their contributions, not their relationships or their ability to self-promote, where talent matters more than ego, where respect is non-negotiable, regardless of someone's position or title, where we recognize and celebrate everyone's achievements, not just the loudest voices in the room. That's the culture we're building. That starts today, right now, in this moment. More applause, stronger now." People were starting to realize that something significant had just happened, that they had witnessed a moment that would be talked about for years, that would become part of company legend. Some of them were still filming on their phones. Others were just standing there in awe. Naomi stepped down from the stage with the same controlled grace she had used to climb it. She walked over to David Ochoa and Jennifer Park, who were both trying not to laugh, who were both looking at her with expressions of pure admiration. "We're going to need to have an emergency meeting of the executive team tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. We need to discuss some personnel changes." They nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Marcus's time as a manager at Chen Technologies was over. Marcus finally climbed down from the stage, his face red with shame and anger, his hands shaking. He approached Naomi, reaching for her arm like he was going to pull her aside. "We need to talk, in private, right now." She pulled away from his touch, her expression cold. "We'll talk, but not here and not now. Right now, I'm going to finish attending this party as the owner of this company. You should probably leave." "Naomi, please, you're embarrassing me." "I'm embarrassing you." Her voice was quiet but deadly. "You just spent 10 minutes telling 200 people that I'm stupid, that I don't understand business, that my only value is in staying out of your way. And you think I'm the one embarrassing you, Mr. Chen?" Jennifer Park stepped between them, her voice professional but firm. "I think a mess." Williams made her wishes clear. "Perhaps it would be best if you called a cab and went home to process everything that's happened tonight." Marcus looked around desperately, searching for allies, for sympathy, for anyone who would back him up or tell him this was all some terrible misunderstanding. He found none. The colleagues who had laughed at his jokes earlier were looking away, suddenly fascinated by their drinks or their phones. The people who had seemed impressed by his swagger were suddenly very interested in the Christmas decorations. No one wanted to be associated with him right now. Not when his wife, his boss, the owner of the entire company, was standing right there, watching him with an expression of cold disappointment. He left, walked out of the party without another word, without his coat, without his dignity, without any of the confidence he had possessed just minutes earlier. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. The party continued after that, but the energy had completely changed. It was no longer a company Christmas party. It had become something else, something historic. People approached Naomi cautiously at first, then more boldly as the reality sank in, and as they realized she was approachable and warm despite her obvious power. She answered questions graciously, patiently. She talked about her vision for the company, about the investments she planned to make, about the growth opportunities she saw. She assured people that their jobs were safe, that the acquisition was about expansion and improvement, not cuts and layoffs. She was professional, warm, and completely in control, showing everyone in that room exactly why she had been so successful in business. Around 11 p.m., as the party was winding down and people were starting to call cabs and ride shares, Jennifer Park pulled Naomi aside into a quiet corner. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed in 20 years of corporate life. I've seen hostile takeovers. I've seen CEO firings. I've seen all kinds of corporate drama. But I have never, ever seen anything like what just happened." Naomi smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The adrenaline was wearing off, and exhaustion was setting in. "I didn't want it to happen like this. I really didn't. I had a plan for how to reveal my ownership. It involved PowerPoint slides and a staff meeting and a carefully worded announcement. It didn't involve publicly humiliating my husband. He humiliated himself, Jennifer said firmly. You just revealed the truth. There's a difference. But you knew it was going to happen eventually, some version of this confrontation, I suspected, Naomi admitted, leaning against the brick wall. Marcus has been getting worse over the past year, more dismissive, more condescending, more convinced of his own importance. I kept hoping he would change, that maybe if I just stayed quiet and didn't challenge him, he'd eventually grow out of it. But people don't grow out of disrespect. They just get bolder when no one calls them on it. What are you going to do about him, professionally, I mean? Obviously the marriage is probably over, but what about his job? Naomi sighed, the weight of the decision pressing on her. He's actually good at his job, believe it or not. When he's not grandstanding or taking credit for other people's work, he does produce results. His project completion rate is solid. His teams generally meet their deadlines, but I can't have someone in a management position who treats people the way he treated me tonight. That kind of toxicity spreads. It creates a culture where disrespect becomes normalized. So what's the solution? So we'll offer him a choice. He can take a demotion to individual contributor, no management responsibilities, no direct reports, with the understanding that he's on probation for 6 months and that we'll be watching his behavior closely. Or he can take a generous severance package and find employment elsewhere. His decision. I'm not going to fire him outright because that would look vindictive, and I don't want this to be about personal revenge, but I'm also not going to let him continue in a leadership role. Jennifer nodded approvingly. Fair, more than fair, considering what he did tonight. A lot of owners would have fired him on the spot. I'm not doing it to be vindictive, Naomi said quietly, more to herself than to Jennifer. I'm doing it because this company deserves better. The employees deserve leadership that respects them and values their contributions. And honestly, I deserve better than spending the next however many years working in the same company as someone who sees me as less than human. She went home that night to an empty house. Marcus had texted her that he was staying at a hotel downtown, that he needed space to process everything that had happened. She didn't respond. What was there to say? She poured herself a glass of wine, sat on her couch overlooking the Seattle skyline, the lights of the city twinkling below her, and finally let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of making herself smaller, so he could feel bigger. 7 years of hiding her success, so he wouldn't feel threatened or insecure. 7 years of accommodating and compromising and swallowing her pride every single day. 7 years of pretending to be less intelligent, less capable, less successful than she actually was. And it had all led to him publicly humiliating her in front of 200 people because he genuinely, truly believed she was beneath him. Because somewhere along the way, her accommodation had convinced him that she actually was less than him, that his perception of her as inferior was based in reality rather than in her deliberate diminishment of herself. The next morning, Marcus came home. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, his eyes red and puffy, his clothes rumpled, still wearing the same suit from the party. He tried to apologize, but his apology was full of excuses and deflections. He said he was drunk, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded, that people had been egging him on, that the pressure of the promotion had been getting to him for weeks. He said everything except the one thing that mattered, that he was wrong, that he had been disrespectful, that he understood why what he did was unforgivable. Everything except taking actual responsibility for his actions. Naomi listened quietly, standing in her kitchen still wearing her bathrobe, coffee in hand. Then she said 5 words that changed everything. I want a divorce. Naomi, no, we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can figure this out together. We can't. This isn't about last night, Marcus. Last night was just the moment when I finally saw clearly what I've been trying not to see for years. You don't respect me. You don't value me. You don't see me as an equal. You love the idea of having a wife, but you don't actually want a partner. You want an audience. You want someone who makes you feel important by being less important than you. That's not true. I love you. I've always loved you. You love a version of me that doesn't exist. You love the quiet, accommodating wife who doesn't challenge you or outshine you. But that's not who I am. That's who I've been pretending to be because I thought that's what you needed. And I'm done. I'm done pretending I'm less than I am. I'm done hiding my success. I'm done making myself small so you can feel big. Marcus sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. This is because of what I said at the party. If I could take it back, I would. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly. Marcus, alcohol doesn't create feelings that aren't already there. It just removes the filter that usually keeps you from saying them out loud. Everything you said last night, about me not understanding business, about me being out of my depth, about me being support staff, those are things you actually believe. You've probably believed them for years. The only difference is that last night you said them publicly instead of just thinking them privately. I don't think that about you. I swear I don't. Naomi set down her coffee cup and looked at her husband with something like pity. Then why have you never once in 7 years of marriage asked me about my work? Why have you never asked what Stratford Capital does, or how I built it, or what my day-to-day responsibilities are? Why have you dismissed every attempt I've made to talk about my career? Why do you always change the subject when I mention an accomplishment? It's because somewhere deep down you don't want to know. You don't want to confront the reality that I might be more successful than you. It's easier to believe I'm just dabbling in some hobby that doesn't really matter. Marcus couldn't answer. He sat there in silence, and Naomi could see him running through their entire relationship in his mind, seeing it now through her eyes, recognizing all the moments he had diminished her without even realizing he was doing it. I want you to move out by the end of the week, Naomi said, her voice gentle but firm. I'll have my lawyer draw up divorce papers. We can split things equitably. I'm not interested in punishing you financially. I just want out. What about the company? Are you going to fire me? Naomi almost laughed at that. Of course, that's what he would focus on. Not their marriage, not their relationship, but his job. You'll receive a formal offer tomorrow from HR. You can accept a demotion to individual contributor with no management responsibilities, or you can take a severance package. Your choice. But either way, you won't be in a leadership position at Chen Technologies anymore. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. Marcus tried to fight it at first, tried couples counseling, tried grand gestures and promises of change. He sent flowers every day for 2 weeks. He wrote long emails explaining how he would be different, how he understood now what he had done wrong. He showed up at her office building, trying to talk to her, trying to convince her to give him another chance. But Naomi had made up her mind. She had spent too many years being someone she wasn't. She was ready to be fully herself. Consequences be damned. The divorce proceedings were relatively clean, all things considered. Marcus had signed a prenuptial agreement when they got married, back when he thought his career would far outpace hers, so there wasn't much to fight over. They split their shared assets down the middle. Naomi kept the house in Seattle. Marcus moved to a condo in Bellevue. They divided their furniture, their art, their books. The whole thing was cordial and businesslike, handled mostly through lawyers. As for Chen Technologies, Marcus took the severance package. He couldn't handle the demotion, couldn't stomach being an individual contributor at a company his ex-wife owned, couldn't face walking past the stage where his entire world had collapsed every single day. The severance was generous, 6 months' salary plus extended health benefits, and he used the time to job hunt. He found a position at a competitor 3 months later, though notably it was a lateral move at best, not the advancement he had been expecting. The story of what happened at the Christmas party had spread through Seattle's tech community, and not in a way that made Marcus look good. People knew he had publicly humiliated his wife. They knew she had turned out to own his company. They knew he had been forced out. That kind of reputation damage doesn't disappear quickly in a tight-knit professional community. The company thrived under Naomi's visible leadership. Once she was officially announced as the owner and CEO, everything changed. She brought in new talent, people who had been wanting to work with her for years, but didn't know she was connected to Chen Technologies. She expanded into emerging markets, leveraging her network and her reputation in the investment world. She secured partnerships with major corporations who wanted to work with a company owned by someone with her track record. She invested millions in infrastructure upgrades, in employee development programs, in research and development. And it paid off. The company's profitability increased by 37% in the first year under her visible leadership. Revenue grew by 40% 2%. Employee satisfaction scores went up by 63%. But more importantly than the numbers, she created a culture where people felt valued and respected, regardless of their title or background. She implemented policies that promoted work-life balance. She created mentorship programs that connected junior employees with senior leaders. She established clear pathways for advancement based on merit rather than politics. She made it clear that disrespect and toxic behavior would not be tolerated at any level of the organization. Several managers who had been known for aggressive or demeaning management styles were let go in the first 6 months. The message was clear. This was a new era at Chen Technologies. 2 years after the Christmas party, a video of that night went viral on social media. Someone who had been recording on their phone that evening, probably dozens of people, actually, had posted it online, and it spread like wildfire. The clip of Marcus's condescending speech, followed by Naomi's revelation, became a cultural moment. It was shared millions of times across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. People loved the instant karma of it, the poetic justice of a man being taken down by the very person he was disrespecting. The video was shared with captions like, "When karma is instant, never underestimate the person you're disrespecting," the look on his face when she reveals she owns everything, and this is why you don't publicly humiliate your spouse. The video made Naomi famous in a way she had never wanted to be. She had spent years building her reputation in business circles, but she had always been relatively private. Now, suddenly, millions of people knew her face and her story. She became a symbol, whether she wanted to be or not. A symbol of standing up for yourself. A symbol of not accepting disrespect. A symbol of powerful women who refuse to be diminished. Naomi gave a few interviews about it, reluctantly. She didn't want to be known as the woman from that video. She had accomplished so much in her career, had built an incredible company, had helped dozens of other companies succeed, and she didn't want to be reduced to a viral moment. But she understood that her story resonated with people, women who had been underestimated by their partners, by their colleagues, by society, people of color who had been dismissed and overlooked despite their qualifications. Anyone who had ever been made to feel less than because of someone else's ego or insecurity. In one particularly memorable interview with a business journalist from Bloomberg, the reporter asked her if she regretted how it had all unfolded. "I regret that it had to happen publicly," Naomi answered honestly, choosing her words carefully. "I regret that 200 people had to witness that moment. I regret that it became entertainment for millions of people on social media, but I don't regret the outcome. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives are the ones that force us to stop pretending. That night forced me to stop pretending that my marriage was something it wasn't. It forced me to stop hiding who I really was. It forced me to choose between continuing to make myself small or finally standing up for myself. And ultimately, as painful as it was, that was a gift." What would you say to your ex-husband if he was watching this interview? Naomi paused, considering the question carefully. She knew Marcus probably would watch it. He was probably still keeping tabs on her, still trying to make sense of how everything had fallen apart. "I'd say thank you. Thank you for showing me so clearly what I deserved and wasn't getting. Thank you for making the decision easy. Thank you for being so blatant in your disrespect that I couldn't ignore it anymore or make excuses for it. And I hope you've learned something from this experience. Though I suspect you probably haven't. People like Marcus rarely do. They just find new audiences for their performance, new people to impress, new situations where they can position themselves as the most important person in the room." The reporter laughed. "That's pretty harsh." "It's honest. People like Marcus don't usually change fundamentally. They might adjust their behavior on the surface, might learn to be more careful about what they say in public, but the underlying belief system remains the same. They still think they're superior. They just get better at hiding it. But that's not my problem anymore. I've got a company to run and a life to live, and both are infinitely better without someone who sees me as an accessory rather than an equal." 3 years after the divorce was finalized, Naomi met someone new. A marine biologist named Dr. Sarah Ackafer, who had no interest in the business world and found Naomi's success interesting but not intimidating. Sarah had her own career, her own accomplishments, her own passions that had nothing to do with corporate finance or acquisitions or stock portfolios. They met at a charity event Naomi was funding, an ocean conservation initiative focused on protecting endangered coral reefs. Sarah was one of the scientists presenting research, and Naomi had been genuinely fascinated by the presentation. They started talking after the event, discovered they had far more in common than just the charity work, and exchanged numbers. Their first date was at a small Ethiopian restaurant in Capitol Hill, far removed from the fancy corporate world Naomi usually inhabited. They talked for 4 hours, closing down the restaurant, and Naomi found herself laughing more than she had in years. Sarah was brilliant, passionate about her work, and treated Naomi like a complete person rather than a resume with legs. She asked about Naomi's business, but she also asked about her childhood, her dreams, her hobbies outside of work, what she liked to read, where she wanted to travel. She was interested in all of Naomi, not just the successful parts. On their third date, they were walking along the waterfront at sunset, and Sarah said, "So I Googled you. I probably should have done that before our first date, but I liked not knowing. But then my sister sent me this video and, wow, that was quite a moment." Naomi felt her stomach drop. She had been dreading this conversation, waiting for Sarah to bring it up, wondering if it would change how Sarah saw her. "I was hoping we could get to know each other without that being the first thing you learned about me." "We already have. I've known you for 3 weeks now, and I've formed my own opinions. The video just gave me context for some things you've mentioned, but I want to hear it from you if you're comfortable sharing." So Naomi told her the whole story. About the marriage, about the years of accommodation, about the Christmas party and the divorce and everything that came after. She braced herself for judgment or pity or awkwardness. Instead, Sarah laughed, not at Naomi, but at the absurdity of Marcus's behavior. "So let me get this straight. This man publicly humiliated you at a party full of his colleagues, not knowing that you literally owned everything around him, including his job and the building he was standing in. That's accurate. And then you revealed who you were, essentially ended your marriage right there on stage, and took over the company visibly while he left in shame, also accurate. That's amazing. You're amazing. Also, he was clearly an idiot, so you upgraded significantly by leaving, like exponentially upgraded. Going from him to being single was probably an improvement, and now here you are on a date with a brilliant and very attractive marine biologist." Sarah grinned. "I'm the attractive marine biologist in this scenario, in case that wasn't clear." Naomi felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. This was what partnership was supposed to feel like. Mutual respect, genuine admiration, no competition, no resentment, no need for one person to be smaller so the other could feel bigger. Just two accomplished people who appreciated each other's success rather than being threatened by it. They moved in together a year later, bought a house with a view of the water that Sarah loved because she could see the ecosystem she studied every day. They built a life together that felt balanced and genuine, where both of their careers mattered, where both of their dreams had space to grow. As for Marcus, reports filtered back through mutual acquaintances over the years. He remarried about 18 months after the divorce was finalized, to a woman named Stephanie who worked in marketing and seemed happy to play the supportive spouse role he had wanted from Naomi. They had a child together, moved to the suburbs, created what looked from the outside like a perfectly conventional life. Marcus told people that the divorce from Naomi had been mutual, that they had simply grown apart, that they wanted different things. He never mentioned the Christmas party. He certainly never mentioned being married to one of the most successful businesswomen in Seattle. He had rewritten the history in his mind, created a narrative where he was just an innocent victim of circumstance rather than the architect of his own humiliation. But the internet doesn't forget. The video still resurfaced every few months, making the rounds on social media, each time with a new generation discovering it, and being amazed by the karmic justice of it all. Each time it circulated, Chen Technologies saw a spike in job applications. People wanted to work for a company owned by the woman who hadn't backed down, who hadn't accepted disrespect, who had stood up for herself so decisively and publicly. The company's reputation grew not despite the viral video, but because of it. It became known as a place with strong values, where character mattered, where respect was non-negotiable. On the 5th anniversary of that infamous Christmas party, Chen Technologies held their annual holiday celebration. The company had tripled in size since Naomi took over publicly. What had been 200 employees was now over 600. They had expanded into 3 new markets. They had been recognized as one of the best places to work in the Pacific Northwest. The culture had completely transformed from what it had been under the previous ownership. And Naomi stood on the same stage where Marcus had humiliated her 5 years earlier, looking out at her room full of talented, respected, valued employees who knew exactly who she was and what she had built. 5 years ago, she said into the microphone, her voice strong and clear, something happened at a company event that changed the trajectory of this organization. I'm not going to rehash all the details. I think we all know the story by now, and if you don't, someone will definitely fill you in later, or you can't. Just Google it like everyone else. Laughter rippled through the crowd. They did know the story. The viral video was part of company lore now, part of the mythology of Chen Technologies under Naomi's leadership. What I will say is this. That night taught me that you can't build anything meaningful on a foundation of pretending to be less than you are. Not a marriage, not a company, not a life. Pretending requires constant energy, constant vigilance, constant self-diminishment. And eventually, you lose track of who you actually are underneath all the pretending. I almost lost myself completely trying to be someone I thought I needed to be. And I made a commitment that night that Chen Technologies would be a place where everyone could be fully themselves, where talent and character mattered more than ego or posturing, where respect was the baseline, not the exception, where people were valued for who they are, not who they pretend to be. She raised her glass, and 600 people raised theirs in response. So here's to 5 years of growth, 5 years of authenticity, 5 years of building something real together, and here's to the next 5 years being even better, because I believe they will be. We've got incredible momentum. We've got incredible people. We've got incredible possibilities ahead of us. Thank you all for being part of this journey. The room erupted in applause. People cheered. Someone started chanting her name, and others joined in, and Naomi stood there feeling genuinely happy in a way she hadn't during those years with Marcus. She had built something real here, something that mattered, something that made a difference in people's lives, and she had done it without making herself smaller, without hiding, without pretending to be anything other than exactly who she was. After the party, she went home to the life she had built. Sarah was waiting, having skipped the work event to finish a research paper that was due the next morning. They made tea and sat on their couch overlooking the water, and Naomi told her about the anniversary party and the toast and the standing ovation she had received. "Do you ever regret how it happened?" Sarah asked, the same question everyone always asked eventually. The public nature of it all. The fact that millions of people saw what should have been a private moment. Naomi considered the question the way she always did, giving it real thought rather than just offering the expected answer. Sometimes, when the video goes viral again and I get a flood of messages from strangers, or when people recognize me in public and want to talk about it, or when it becomes the first thing new business contacts know about me, in those moments, I wish it had happened privately. But then I remember that the public nature of it is what made it impossible for Marcus to spin the narrative. There were 200 witnesses. There was video. There was no way for him to rewrite history and make himself the victim or make me the unreasonable one. And honestly, that clarity was worth the temporary embarrassment, that undeniable proof of what happened, that public record. It prevented years of gaslighting and manipulation that might have followed otherwise. Plus, it gave you an incredible story for motivational speaking gigs. Naomi laughed. There is that. I've been invited to speak at universities, conferences, women's leadership events. I never thought I'd be a motivational speaker, but apparently people find the story inspiring. Who knew that standing up for yourself would be such a radical act that it inspires others? It shouldn't be radical, Sarah said quietly. But it is, especially for women, especially for Black women. You're expected to be accommodating, to not make waves, to support everyone else's dreams while putting your own aside. When you refuse to do that, when you claim your space and your power, people notice because it's so rare. I just wish more people felt free to claim their space without needing a dramatic viral moment to justify it. Maybe that's what the video does, though. Maybe it gives other people permission. Maybe someone out there is in a relationship like you were in, making themselves smaller, wondering if it's worth it to stand up for themselves, and they see your video and they think, if she can do it, maybe I can too. Naomi hoped that was true. She hoped that something good had come from that painful, public moment. She hoped that somewhere, someone had watched her stand up on that stage and reveal her truth, and had found the courage to reveal their own truth, whatever that looked like. The husband who publicly shamed his Black wife had learned, in the most humiliating way possible, that assumptions about power and position could be catastrophically wrong. He learned that the person you disrespect might be the person who controls your entire professional future. He learned that cruelty has consequences even when you think you're untouchable. He learned that the woman he had spent years diminishing was actually more successful, more accomplished, more respected than he could ever hope to be. But more importantly, the woman who had been shamed learned something too. She learned that she didn't have to accept disrespect to maintain peace. She learned that being fully herself was worth more than any relationship built on her diminishment. She learned that hiding her light didn't actually help anyone, least of all herself. She learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let the consequences unfold, trusting that you're strong enough to handle whatever comes next. And she learned that she was, in fact, strong enough to walk away from a marriage that was slowly eroding her sense of self, strong enough to stand in front of 200 people and claim her power, strong enough to build a company and a life on her own terms, without apology, without accommodation, without making herself smaller for anyone's comfort. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment with your city and your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up for yourself in a way that changed everything? Have you ever been in a relationship where you made yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable? Share your story. Let's build a community of people who refuse to make themselves smaller for anyone else's comfort, who claim their space and their power without apology. Because the world needs fewer people like Marcus. People who need others to be less so they can feel like more. And the world needs more people like Naomi. People who know their worth and won't compromise it for anyone. People who understand that real love and real partnership never require you to diminish yourself. People who recognize that the most generous thing you can do is be fully, authentically yourself.